months, the United States and other NATO members have sent billions of dollars worth of weaponry to Ukraine. But for many smaller NATO countries, and even some larger ones, the conflict has strained their weapons inventories. Stocks of some U.S. equipment have fallen to the lowest levels needed for operational planning and training, and restoring stocks to pre-Russian Ukrainian conflict levels could take years. Will this bring about another security crisis? Welcome to Channel Deep-In Moments. Today's topic: NATO, US, Europe to run out of weapons and bring crisis due to endless military aid to Ukraine. The ongoing Russian-Ukrainian conflict has exhausted both sides, as well as the Western countries that are behind Ukraine. While the West continues to play up the depletion of Russian precision-guided weapons, the US military's Stars and Stripes admits that there is currently a shortage of weapons in stockpiles across Europe. This leaves European countries with a difficult choice: continue to send weapons stockpiles to Ukraine to support its fight back against Russia, or keep the remaining weapons to protect their own homelands. The EU's highest-ranking diplomat said on May 15 that EU countries should work together to replenish their respective arms stocks and avoid competing with each other in the delivery of arms to Ukraine. The EU has long urged member states to join forces in the arms procurement process, rather than competing with each other or reaching separate agreements with suppliers outside the EU that could lead to higher prices. But member states have been reluctant to heed this advice. Josep Borrell, the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, told reporters at a meeting of EU defense ministers in Brussels, "By joining forces we can get better prices, better quality, faster times." He said the defense ministers had agreed that the European defense industry needs to increase production quickly to replenish the stockpiles of weapons that have been transferred to Ukraine. At the same time, he acknowledged that stable demand could create the basis for increased production. In its annual assessment report to the defense ministers, the European Defence Agency said that the military budgets of the 27 EU member states would increase by €70 billion by 2025, but that a lack of cooperation on projects and military acquisitions outside the EU could undermine efforts to create a cohesive force. The European Defence Agency says that only 18% of all investment in defence projects involves cooperation between member states. Investments in European projects are often seen as more time-consuming and complex. According to Josep Borrell, this percentage is too low. We need to reach 35%. EU defense ministers also discussed the issue of replenishing funds for the European Peace Facility. EU member states use these mechanisms to fund the purchase of weapons and equipment for Kiev, but have largely run out of money after nearly 9 months of war in Ukraine. Josep Borrell did not give a specific figure for the injection, but said he hoped to find a solution by the end of the year. Since the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine conflict in February, the US has committed more than $17.5 billion in arms and equipment to Ukraine, leading some members of the US Congress to question whether the US itself is taking too much risk. In addition, several European countries have sent much of their stockpiles of weapons and material to Ukraine since the outbreak of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Figures released by the Germany-based Kiel Institute show that Norway provided more than 45% of its stockpile of howitzers, Slovenia nearly 40% of its tanks, and the Czech Republic 33% of its multiple rocket launcher systems. Lithuanian MP Dovilas Sakalyin said in a telephone interview that aid to Ukraine has led to a general shortage of weapons supplies because many countries have forgotten that conventional warfare is depleting their own ammunition stocks and that in some cases we have left ourselves with only a minimum of weapons stocks. The German Defense Ministry said in an email that Germany was facing a similar situation. The email reads, "Yes, the German Bundeswehr's stockpile is limited, just like in other European countries." One of the reasons for the shortage of weaponry in Europe has to do with the United States. After the end of the Cold War, many European countries have cut back on military spending, weakening their defense industry capabilities. Powerful US military giants have squeezed the market share of their European counterparts, leaving many European countries heavily dependent on the dominant US defense companies. "We want them, Europe, to buy American," said Max Bergman, director of the European Studies Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a US think tank. When Norway became accustomed to using American F-16 and F-35 fighter jets instead of the Swedish-made Hawks and Lions, the capacity of the European defense industry was already substantially affected. Faced with this situation, Europe came under pressure when U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin urged NATO members at a NATO meeting in Brussels in the middle of last month to dig deeper and provide additional capabilities for Ukraine. Some European officials said that while they would continue to support Ukraine, the burden of maintaining their own defense is on them all. Max Bergman said that for some NATO countries, the U.S. demands may be difficult to meet. These countries may not be able to dig as deep as the US would like. They have basically lost the fat and are now cutting into the bones. For his part, Estonian Defense Minister Hanno Pevkur said, "We reckon Russia will regain their capabilities sooner or later because Russian President Vladimir Putin can order weapons manufacturers to produce 24 hours a day, and Russia has sent some troops to factories rather than to the front line." After 8 months of fierce fighting, Europe expects the Russian-Ukrainian conflict to continue for months, if not years, more. In this scenario, both sides will quickly run out of weapons supplies, and victory could come down to who can hold out longer. Lloyd Austin recently said that the US and its Western allies would have difficulty keeping up with Ukraine's need for advanced weapons. The signal was interpreted as a sign that US military stocks are dwindling and cannot continue to supply Ukraine, and that the White House is concerned that an escalation could lead to a military conflict between the US and Russia. At a recent meeting of the Ukrainian Defense Contact Group, Austin responded to the question, is it a lack of political will or a lack of supply that the West is not sending air defense systems to Ukraine as soon as possible, by saying certainly not a lack of will, but did not give a positive answer. Commenting on whether supporting Ukraine would affect the U.S. military inventory, Austin said, "We will produce and deliver these efficient weapons in the coming months, if not years, while continuing to meet Ukraine's most urgent needs." Since the U.S. provided military aid to Ukraine, reports have emerged about the risk of a reduction in the U.S. high-end weapons stockpile. Military experts have analyzed that the U.S. may now have reached, or be very close to, the limits of its supply capacity. Austin's comments suggest that the initial rush to supply Ukraine with high-end weapons such as the HIMARS multiple launch rocket system, Javelin anti-tank missiles, and the M777 howitzer is over, sources have said to the outside world. Mark Kanchan, a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies who has been involved in U.S. government arms procurement, said that assessments based on stock levels, production capacity and information provided by the Biden administration showed that U.S. supplies of the Seamaster, Javelin, Stinger and M777 howitzers were limited. "In some areas we are basically at the bottom of the barrel," he said. In some cases, Kanchan argued, this could mean that the U.S. might meet Ukraine's weapons needs by providing low-end alternatives, or it could mean that the U.S. doesn't have much to offer. In addition, some have interpreted Austin's statement differently, suggesting that the Biden administration intends to slow arms shipments to Ukraine because it fears getting into a direct conflict with Russia. "They're worried about escalation," said one congressional aide. There is a perception within the U.S. Congress that U.S. shipments to Ukraine have led to a marked reduction in stocks of certain weapons, but do not pose a threat to the U.S. itself. The current situation in Ukraine has weakened Russia's military capabilities, which means that a decline in U.S. stockpiles would not put the U.S. on the brink of a crisis. The Biden administration had more flexibility to provide more aid to Ukraine, but did not do so. Russia's ambassador to the U.S., Anatoly Antonov, said on November 11 that the U.S. and its allies were on the verge of hitting a red line by continuing to send weapons to Kyiv. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov hoped that the U.S. and its allies would be aware of the danger of an uncontrollable escalation, warning that Russia might be forced to counteract, including through non-reciprocal measures. It's the end of this video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel to support. See you next time.